My name is Evelyn Maren. I'm 24 years old, and no one believes me when I say my entire life changed because of a plastic bottle of water and a man sitting in the back seat of a limousine. I wasn't supposed to be there that day. I wasn't supposed to be at that specific red light, on that specific avenue, under that kind of sun that makes the asphalt look like it's melting. But life doesn't ask permission before it breaks you. And it certainly didn't ask when it decided to put me in front of him, with sweat on my neck, dust on my shoes, and a tray of cheap water bottles in my hands. You probably imagine my life now if you've seen the headlines, the comments, the photos they steal from my social media. You've seen the dress, the rings, the parties, the cars. You see a gold digger, a lucky girl, a woman who sold water at a traffic light and married a millionaire. But that's not how the story really started. And definitely not how it felt from where I was standing. Back then, I was just a girl trying to make enough to pay rent and keep my mother's medication from running out. I didn't feel inspiring. I didn't feel special. I felt tired. Tired of pretending I wasn't afraid of the end of the month. Tired of hearing car windows closing in my face. Tired of seeing the light turn green just as someone finally looked at me. If you've never felt invisible in a crowd of people who have everything you don't, I don't know how to explain that kind of loneliness. That morning had been worse than usual. My boss had shouted at me because I'd dropped a crate and cracked some bottles. My mother had called crying because the pharmacy had refused to give her more pills without full payment. And my younger brother had sent me a voice message saying he'd skip school because he didn't have money for the bus. I remember listening to his voice with the tray against my hip, feeling guilty for a life I hadn't created but somehow needed to fix. The avenue where I worked was famous, the kind of place where people took pictures not of the buildings, but of themselves in front of the buildings. Tall glass towers, designer stores, restaurants with chairs I knew cost more than everything I was wearing. I used to joke with myself that I was part of the scenery, just another detail people's. Eyes slid over while they checked their phones and waited for the light to turn green. And then his car appeared. I didn't see him first. I saw the car. A long black limousine, the kind I'd only seen in movies or parked in front of hotels I'd never enter. It moved slowly into the lane closest to the sidewalk, right where I usually stood. The windows were dark, reflecting the sun so strongly I had to squint, and for a few seconds I just stared. Not because I thought something would happen, but because it was easier than thinking about my mother's voice message. The light turned red, and the city softened. Cars aligned and stopped, engines humming like a low, constant wave. I adjusted my tray against my hip, pushed sweaty hair from my forehead, and started my usual routine, calling out for water, walking between cars, pretending I didn't hear the people who laughed, or locked their doors, or rolled their eyes at me. When I reached the limousine, my heart was already racing, but not because of him. I was out of breath, my legs aching, my throat dry. I hesitated for a second, wondering if someone that rich would ever buy something so cheap from someone like me. But I took one step closer anyway because I couldn't afford to be proud. I tapped lightly on the tinted glass just once. No answer. Normally that would be the end of it. I would move on, pretending it didn't sting, but something inside me felt heavier that day. It might have been my brother's voice or my mother's silence, but I didn't move. I just stood there, looking at my own distorted reflection in the window, my faded t-shirt, my messy hair, the thin gold chain my father had given me before he left and never came back. I don't know why I said what I said next. Maybe it slipped from somewhere I'd been holding my words too tight. Maybe it was a prayer that accidentally came out loud. If you're not gonna buy water, I murmured half to myself, half to whoever might be listening behind that glass, at least pray that my mother doesn't die this month. I didn't realize the window was opening until the sound of the mechanism cut through the noise of the street. The dark glass slid down slowly, and for the first time, I saw him. He didn't look like the men who yelled orders on their phones, or the ones who refused to look at me like I was human. He was dressed in a dark suit that fit him perfectly, his tie slightly loosened, as if he'd already had a long day. His hair was neatly combed back, a few rebellious strands falling over his forehead in a way that looked almost tired, but it was his eyes that froze me. They weren't cold. They weren't distant. They were searching, as if he had been waiting to hear something that made no sense for a man like him to wait for. "How old are you?" he asked. His voice was calm, deep, steady in a way that made the world around us feel even more chaotic. I swallowed, caught off guard by the question. No one ever asked me that. No one cared. They cared about the price of the water, the change in my hand, the timer on the traffic light. "I'm 24, I answered, trying not to sound nervous. "My name is Evelyn." He held my gaze for a second longer than I was comfortable with. I felt exposed, as if he could see every night I'd cried into my pillow, every time I'd skipped dinner so my brother could eat, every lie I'd told my mother about how things would get better soon. "Evelyn," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "And your mother? Why would she die this month?" I shouldn't have said anything. I knew better. People didn't like to be reminded that their world of glass and steel was built above people sinking in the dark. But his eyes didn't have that irritated impatience I was used to. They had something else. Curiosity, concern, maybe even a hint of recognition, like he knew what it meant to be afraid of losing someone. "The pharmacy won't give her more medication without full payment," I said, words tumbling out before I could stop them. "And I'm already behind on rent. And I'm sorry." I shook my head, suddenly ashamed. She just asked for my age. "Do you want water or not?" He didn't look away from me. The traffic light ticked down seconds in the distance, and I could feel the city breathing behind me, impatient. "How much do you make in a day, selling here?" he asked instead, ignoring my question. I blinked, confused. "On a good day? Maybe 40, 50. On days like today?" I glanced at my almost full tray. Sometimes not even that. His jaw tightened slightly, a small movement I might have missed if I hadn't been staring at him like a cornered animal. He reached into his jacket, and for a second I thought he was going to hand me cash to make me go away, to relieve his conscience and then forget my face as soon as the light turned green. But his hand came back not with money, but with a sleek black phone. "Do you have pics?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. Yes, I stammered. "I mean, yes, I do, but you don't have to." "I didn't ask if I had to," he said softly. "I asked if you have it." I hesitated, then balanced the tray with one hand and reached into my pocket with the other, pulling out my old, cracked phone. My fingers trembled a little as I opened the banking app and showed my QR code through the cracked screen. I watched his eyes lower to the image, then lift back to mine. For a moment I wondered if he thought I was scamming him, if he would change his mind. But he didn't. His thumb moved quickly over his own screen, and a few seconds later my phone vibrated. I glanced down automatically, expecting some small amount, maybe enough to cover lunch or a bus ride. The number staring back at me made my throat close. I looked up at him again, my lips parting wordlessly, but the right words refused to come. Around us, horns started to honk. The traffic light had turned green, and the cars behind him were growing impatient. "You should check on your mother," he said quietly, almost as if the chaos around us didn't exist, "and on your brother." I opened my mouth to ask him why, to ask him who he was, to tell him that this couldn't be right, that he must have added one zero to many. But the driver started moving, and the limousine began to roll forward, the window already sliding back up. "Wait," I blurted, taking a step after the car, my hand still clutching the tray. "Sir, what's your name?" The window almost closed completely. Then, just before it sealed, it paused, lowering a fraction. I saw his eyes one last time through the narrow gap. "You'll find it in your messages," he said. "If you decide to use what I just sent you for more than 1 month of survival." And then the window shut fully, the limousine merging into the flow of traffic as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all, leaving me standing in the middle of the avenue, my heart racing, my phone buzzing in my hand, and my entire life suddenly split into 2 parts. Before that transfer, and everything that would come after it. I still remember the weight of that moment, the street stretching out in front of me, the sun burning the back of my neck, the sound of engines swelling again as the cars surged forward. But all of it felt distant, almost unreal, compared to the number glowing on my cracked phone screen. It didn't feel like something meant for someone like me. It felt like a mistake, a glitch, a miracle. Or maybe all three wrapped together in a single moment I wasn't prepared for. People brushed past me, annoyed that I stood frozen in the middle of the lane. Someone shouted for me to move. Another honked aggressively, but my legs wouldn't obey. The city was moving and I wasn't. I just stood there, breathless, staring at digits that could change everything if they were real. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the phone. A vendor friend of mine, Thomas, jogged over from the median. "Evelyn, are you crazy? Do you want to get hit? Move! What happened?" he said, grabbing my arm to pull me toward the sidewalk. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words tangled in my throat. Tomas followed my gaze and looked at the screen. He blinked, leaned closer, then recoiled as if the number physically burned him. No way. That's not real, that's not real, that's not real, Evelyn. I shook my head slowly. It came from him. What do you mean, from him? The man in that limousine. My voice cracked as I tried to steady it. He asked for my pics. I thought he'd send $5, maybe $10. Something symbolic. But this... Thomas let out a low whistle, the kind that says the world has just tilted sideways. "This is more than I make in 6 months. It's more than I've ever seen in my account," I whispered. "It's more than my rent for the entire year." "Who was he?" Thomas asked. "I don't know," I said. "But he told me I'd find his name in my messages." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Well? Look." My fingers hesitated above the screen. I was afraid. Afraid it wasn't real. Afraid it was real. Afraid of what accepting such money might mean. Afraid of what it might cost. But the message folder blinked with a tiny notification, a reminder pulling me into whatever came next. I opened it. There was only one message. No photo, no introduction, no explanation. Just a name and a sentence that made my pulse pound in my ears. Adrian Thorne. Use it well. For a few seconds the world felt unnervingly silent, as if the city had stepped back to watch what I'd do next. I knew the name, not personally, but from the kind of stories people whispered with disbelief about a millionaire who had risen from nothing, built an empire, and kept himself invisible despite owning half the skyline. The kind of man who made headlines without ever appearing in them. But why me? Why a girl selling water under the sun? Why that moment? My stomach twisted. I didn't know if I was supposed to feel grateful or terrified. When my shift ended, I didn't take the bus home. I didn't have to count coins to decide if I'd walk instead. For the first time in months, my steps weren't heavy with fear. I walked quickly, my heart still racing. My tray empty, except for the bottles I hadn't sold because I couldn't focus anymore. I wanted to run all the way to my mother's house, throw open the door, and tell her that everything was going to change. But when I arrived, I found her lying on the couch, pale. Her hands pressed to her chest as if she were holding herself together. My brother sat at her side, trying to distract her with a small radio because the electricity had been cut again. Seeing them like that made the money feel less like a miracle and more like a responsibility I'd never asked for. "Mom," I said softly. She looked at me with tired eyes, those eyes that carried more worry than any parent should bear. "Evelyn, is everything okay? You're home early." I sat beside her, taking her hand. Something happened today. Something big." Her eyebrows lowered slightly. "What happened?" I hesitated. How did I explain this without sounding insane? That a man I'd never met, untouched by the kind of struggle that defined my life, had sent me more money than I'd ever expected to see? That he'd really looked at me in a way that felt intrusive and compassionate at the same time? "Mom, someone transferred money to me, a lot of money." Her breath caught. "Evelyn. No, you didn't borrow from someone, did you? You didn't do anything desperate. No, nothing like that. A man in a limousine asked for my pics." She blinked at me, confusion and fear mingling in her expression. Why? I don't know. But the transfer is real. And his name is Adrian Thorne. Both my mother and brother stared at me as if the ceiling had just cracked open. My brother spoke first. The Adrian Thorne? The guy who owns those buildings downtown? That one? I nodded slowly. Yes, my mother pressed her hand to her forehead. Evelyn, people like him don't give money without wanting something in return. I swallowed hard. I knew she was right. I told myself that same thing on the walk home, replaying every second of that brief encounter. The way he asked my age. The way he looked at him like not with arrogance, but with a quiet intensity that terrified me. I don't know what he wants, I admitted, but he told me to use it well, and that I'd find his name in my messages. That's all. Silence settled between us, heavy and uncertain. My brother turned off the radio. My mother squeezed my hands, her fingers shaking slightly. Evelyn, she said quietly, miracles don't come free. You need to be careful, very careful. Her words stayed with me long after she fell asleep, and I found myself lying awake, staring at the cracked ceiling. I tried to tell myself this was just generosity, that maybe he had a soft heart hidden behind wealth. But generosity didn't feel like the right word for the way he looked at me. It felt like recognition. Like he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to notice. And when my phone buzzed again hours later, another message from an unknown number, I felt ice slide down my spine before. I even opened it. You were honest today. That's rare. I'd like to speak with you again. It wasn't signed with a name. It didn't need one. I knew it was him. I didn't answer his message that night. I must have opened it 100 times, reading those 12 words until they stopped looking like words at all and started feeling like a door one I wasn't sure I should walk through. I kept wondering what he meant by honest, what exactly he thought he saw in me through that tinted window. But the more I tried to push his voice out of my head, the more it echoed in the darkness of my room, quiet and unshakable. I barely slept. Every sound outside made me sit up. Every car light passing through the curtains made my heart skip, as if he were somehow closer than he should be. And each time I found myself reaching for my phone again, I felt a strange guilt, as if I were betraying a life I hadn't even lived yet. By morning, my stomach was tight with nerves. I made coffee for my mother, helped her sit up slowly, and insisted she take her medication before she worried about anything else. She asked me several times if I planned to work that day. I told her yes, even though I knew I wouldn't sell a single bottle if my mind stayed this fogged. On my way to the avenue, my phone buzzed again, a second message. If you're afraid, that's reasonable. But don't be afraid of me. I stopped walking. A gust of wind lifted my hair, and for a moment, I felt exposed, as if cameras were pointed at me from every rooftop. How did he know I was afraid? How did he know what I felt instead of what I said? My thumb hovered over the keyboard for several seconds before I typed the smallest reply I could. What do you want? I regretted sending it instantly. It sounded defensive, weak, but the message had already gone. I shoved my phone into my pocket and kept walking, focusing on the rhythm of my steps instead of my thoughts. The morning traffic was loud and messy, but the noise didn't reach me the way it usually did. Everything felt slightly off balance, like the world had shifted a few degrees without warning. When I arrived at the intersection, Thomas was already there. He saw me and jogged over, a teasing smile on his face. Did the limo guy adopt you yet? I rolled my eyes. Shut up. I don't even know why he sent that money. He lifted a brow. And you're not curious. Curious wasn't the right word. I was caught between fear, disbelief, and a feeling I refused to name. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated again. My breath caught, even before I pulled it out. A conversation, nothing more. I stared at the message. A conversation. Men didn't send life-changing money for conversations. Men like him didn't pause limousines for girls like me. Nothing about this made sense. And yet my heart beat faster with every passing second. Tomas peeked over my shoulder. Are you going to answer? I didn't know. If I said yes, what future was I opening? If I said no, what future was I shutting out? The air felt heavy with choices I wasn't ready to make. I typed slowly, my fingers trembling slightly. Where? This time his reply came almost instantly. Somewhere public, somewhere safe. I'll send a car. You choose the time. I stared at the screen, the city's noise fading into a distant hum. A car, a public place. My choice? He was giving me control, but control was the one thing I didn't trust in moments like this. I didn't reply right away. I spent the next few hours walking between cars, selling water, pretending everything was normal. But every time a black car passed, my pulse quickened. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification that wasn't him, disappointment stung in places I didn't admit existed. By noon, I'd sold almost nothing. My hands shook when I lifted bottles. My voice kept cracking when I tried to call out to drivers. And Thomas kept staring at me as if waiting for me to break. Finally, during a rare, quiet moment between red lights, I wiped sweat from my forehead and opened my phone again. Okay, today, 5 p.m. I didn't specify a place. I didn't need to. Something told me he already knew where I worked, where I stood, where I survived. The hours until 5 crawled forward painfully. The sun sank lower, painting long shadows across the avenue. My stomach twisted with every car that slowed near the curb. The closer the time came, the louder my heartbeat became, steady, growing, impossible to ignore. Tomas stayed with me until the very last minute, his worry barely hidden. Evelyn, please don't go if you don't feel safe. I tried to smile. I don't feel safe either way. At exactly 5 p.m., a car pulled up beside me, not a limousine this time, but a black sedan with tinted windows. The driver stepped out, not intimidating, just professionally dressed, with a quiet demeanor. Miss Evelyn? He asked. My voice felt tight. Yes. He opened the back door. Mr. Thorne is expecting you. A cold wave rolled through me. This was too real, too fast, too dangerous, and yet my feet moved. I glanced once at Tomas, who looked like he wanted to pull me away but held himself back. Call me, he whispered. I nodded and slid into the car. The door closed behind me with a soft, inevitable thud. The city blurred as we drove, and every second felt heavier than the last. My hands fidgeted in my lap, trying to find a calm that didn't exist. After 15 minutes, the car slowed. We stopped in front of a quiet cafe with floor to ceiling windows. The kind of place that smelled like roasted coffee and old books. A place meant for conversations that mattered. The driver opened my door, and I stepped out on unsteady legs. Through the window, I saw him seated alone at a small table, the light from a hanging lamp casting soft shadows across his face. Adrian Thorne. The man who changed my life with a window, a question, and a transfer that still didn't feel real. He looked up. Our eyes met through the glass, and something in my chest tightened painfully. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and waited as if he'd been standing for me his entire life. I walked toward the door, each step slow, unsure, almost trembling, because although he had promised safety, nothing about the way he looked at me felt safe at all. The door chimed softly when I pushed it open, letting a breath of warm air and the smell of fresh coffee wrap around me. For a moment, the cafe felt too quiet, too intimate, like the walls themselves knew something important was about to happen. Adrian's gaze followed me from the moment I stepped inside. Steady and unreadable, and I felt suddenly small in a way I hadn't expected. Not invisible, but seen. Fully. And I didn't know whether to fear that or crave it. He didn't rush toward me, he didn't wave or call my name. He simply waited, standing beside his table with one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. His posture controlled, almost elegant. The kind of man who carried silence the way other people carried luxury watches. Evelyn, he said when I finally reached him. His voice sounded exactly as it had in the limousine, deep, calm, and impossibly steady, like nothing in the world could shake him. Thank you for coming. I swallowed hard. You didn't really give me many instructions to refuse. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. You're honest again. Heat crept into my cheeks. I didn't want him to think I was naive or intimidated, even though I was both. I'm just trying to understand why I'm here. And you will, he said softly. Please sit. I lowered myself into the chair, my hands tightening around the strap of my bag. Adrian sat as well, his movements deliberate, his eyes never leaving mine for more than a second. He had a way of looking at me that made the world fall away, not possessive, not aggressive, just intensely present, as if he didn't bother pretending to be distracted. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I couldn't read him, couldn't predict him, and I hated how much that intrigued me. He broke the silence first. Do you know why I asked your age yesterday? No, I said, my voice low. Do you usually ask strangers on the street how old they are? His gaze softened slightly. No, only when they say something that sounds like it came from someone who grew up too fast. My breath caught. I hadn't expected that, not from a man like him. I didn't mean for you to hear what I said. But I did, he replied quietly, and I don't believe in ignoring what's right in front of me. I didn't know what to say. Every answer felt either too small or too revealing. So I stayed quiet, letting him continue. I looked at you, he said, and you looked exhausted. Embarrassment pricked the back of my eyes. I'd worked since morning. I had reasons, that's not what I mean. His gaze deepened. You looked like someone who has carried too much for too long. Someone who fights alone because no one else will step in. My throat tightened. I hated that he was right. I hated even more that he could see it so easily. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice without losing any of its certainty. I didn't send you money to impress you, and I didn't ask you to meet me because of pity. Understand that first. Then why? I whispered. He exhaled slowly and sat back, as if weighing how much truth he was willing to place between us. Because I saw something in you that I haven't seen in a long time, which is raw honesty, he said. People lie to me every day, some for money, some for opportunities, some because they fear disappointing me. I've learned to read people. And you. His eyes traced my face, and I felt a strange shiver roll through me. You didn't look at me like a billionaire. You looked at me like a man who happened to be in your way. A laugh escaped me, unexpected, shaky. I didn't mean to be rude. You weren't. You were real. And I don't encounter real very often. My pulse quickened. I hadn't expected him to say any of this. I had imagined a business proposition, a debt disguised as kindness, or some twisted reason behind his transfer. But this was a different kind of danger. Look, I said softly, gathering the courage to hold his gaze. I'm grateful for what you did. More grateful than you know. But you can't expect me not to be suspicious. This doesn't happen to people like me. His expression shifted subtle, almost imperceptible, but I felt it. A flicker of something like pain, or memory. You're right, he said. It doesn't happen. Not because it shouldn't, but because no one bothers to stop their car long enough to see someone like you. The words hit me harder than I wanted them to. He wasn't trying to charm me. He wasn't trying to buy me. He was stating something that sounded like a confession disguised as observation. The waiter approached our table asking if we wanted anything. Adrian ordered a coffee for himself, then looked at me, waiting. Just water, I said quickly. His eyebrow lifted a fraction amused, maybe, but he didn't comment. When the waiter left, Adrian folded his hands on the table, his eyes focused on me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. Evelyn, he said, I'm not here to make your life harder. If anything, I'd like to make it easier if you'll allow me. It's danger, not the physical kind. The emotional kind, the one that slips beneath your skin before you realize it. What does easier mean to you? I asked cautiously. It means helping without expecting anything in return. It means giving you opportunities you wouldn't have otherwise. It means... He hesitated for the first time, choosing his words with unusual care. Not walking away from someone who clearly deserves more than what life has handed her. No one had ever said something like that to me. Not with sincerity, not with certainty, not with eyes that didn't flinch away from mine. My chest softened and tightened all at once. "You don't even know me." His reply came gently. "Not yet." My heart thudded, louder than before, more dangerous than before. He took a slow sip of coffee, still watching me over the rim of the cup. "Tell me something, Evelyn. If you could change one thing in your life right now, just one, what would it be?" The answer rose in me instantly, but speaking it aloud felt too vulnerable, too humiliating. I stared at the table, tracing the wood grain with my eyes, trying to steady my breathing, but Adrian waited, patient, silent, unyielding. Finally, I whispered, "I'd make it so my mother didn't have to choose between pain and medication." His shoulders eased, as if he had expected that answer. "Then let's start with that." Emotion welled up in my throat, stinging behind my eyes. Why would you do that for me? He didn't smile, he didn't flirt, he didn't soften the truth. "Because someone once did it for me," he said quietly. "And because I recognize the look of someone who just needs one person to care." A silence settled between us, heavy but warm, stretching like a fragile thread. And then his phone buzzed. He glanced down, and for the first time I saw his expression change. Not annoyance, not distraction, but something sharp and unresolved. He locked the screen and looked at me again, but his eyes weren't as steady. Something had shifted. Something I couldn't name yet. "I should take you home," he said. "It's getting late." But it wasn't late, and I wasn't ready to leave. And the way he avoided my gaze told me something important. This man had secrets too. When Adrian stood up from the table, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a tension in his shoulders. Subtle but unmistakable, like a man trying to carry a weight without letting anyone notice. His face stayed composed, but the air around him shifted, as if whatever message he'd read had pulled him somewhere far from me, somewhere he didn't want me to follow. He offered me his hand, not to touch me, but in a silent gesture for me to stand as well. I rose slowly, trying to read him, trying to understand the sudden change in his calm exterior. We walked toward the door together, and even though we weren't touching, I felt the space between us charged with something unspoken, something fragile and dangerous in equal measure. When we stepped outside, the sunlight had softened into that gentle golden hour glow, warm on the skin, but heavy with the promise of evening. The driver was already waiting beside the sedan, holding the door open. Adrian gestured for me to enter first, but as I moved, he lightly touched my arm, barely a brush of his fingers, enough to make my breath hitch. "Before we go," he said quietly, "I want you to understand something." I turned toward him, my pulse drumming in my ears. His expression was serious again, but softer than it had been inside. "You don't owe me anything, Evelyn," he said. "Not your gratitude, not your time, not your trust." My eyes searched his, unsure what he meant or why he looked almost pained saying it. "You came today," he continued. "That was more than enough." Something about the way he said enough felt wrong, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. "I agreed to talk," I said carefully. "But you didn't really finish telling me why." His jaw flexed, as if he was choosing between honesty and restraint. "I will," he said, "but not today." I opened my mouth to ask why not today, not now. Not after everything he'd revealed and everything he'd stirred awake inside me, but he gently shook his head, stopping the question before it formed. Later he said, "When I can speak freely." The driver cleared his throat softly, a polite reminder that we weren't alone. Adrian stepped back, letting me enter the car first. I slid into the back seat, my hands twisting together in my lap, my heart still racing from a conversation I didn't fully understand. He sat beside me, leaving a respectful distance between us, but his presence filled the space. Could feel him without looking at him, his breathing, his silence, his thoughts, heavy and unspoken. The car pulled away from the cafe. The city moved past the windows in softened colors, streetlights flickering on, people walking quickly, unaware that someone like me was sitting beside a man who could buy and sell half the buildings they walked past. For a while, neither of us spoke. I stole a glance at him once, catching the faint crease between his brows. He looked lost in a place far from the car, far from me. I wondered who had messaged him. What had shaken him? What kind of life created a man who could look so composed and so haunted at the same time? Finally, I asked quietly, "Are you always this generous with strangers?" He turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting mine with a soft intensity. "No." "Then why me?" "Because you weren't afraid to tell the truth." I frowned. "What truth?" "That you were hurting," he said. "Most people lie about their pain. They hide it. They pretend. You didn't." I looked down at my hands. I wasn't trying to be brave. I was just tired. "And that," he said, "is usually when people reveal who they really are." My chest tightened, not because of his words, but because of the sincerity behind them. I didn't want to care about what he thought of me. I didn't want to feel this strange pull towards someone whose world was so far from mine. But the connection was there, delicate and dangerous. The car slowed as we neared my neighborhood. My buildings were older, cracked in places, the paint peeling from years of rain. Children played barefoot in the courtyard. A couple argued near the stairwell. The usual noise of home, messy, familiar, real. "This is where you live?" Adrian asked quietly. "Yes." His eyes lingered on the old brick walls, the rusted gates, the narrow windows. Not with judgment, not with disgust, but with something like quiet calculation, as if he were memorizing every detail, storing it somewhere he didn't want to forget. The car came to a stop. I reached for the door handle but froze when I felt his voice behind Milo, almost hesitant. "Evelyn." I turned. His jaw worked once before he spoke. "If anyone asks where the money came from, don't use my name." My stomach dropped. "Why?" He inhaled through his nose, slow, steady, as if choosing each word with precision. "Because there are people who would use that against you. Or against me." A chill ran through me. "Are you in danger?" "No," he said, too quickly, too firmly, "but there are people who watch, and they interpret kindness as weakness." "Are you saying I shouldn't trust you?" His eyes softened painfully. "I'm saying the world I live in isn't safe for someone as unguarded as you." My heart clenched. I didn't want him to leave me with that sentence. I didn't want him to disappear into the night and leave me wondering who he was, who he truly was, behind the wealth and the calm voice and the secrets vibrating beneath his skin. But he didn't give me time to ask more. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple business card, black matte, with a phone number embossed in silver. No name, no company, no title. "If you ever need anything," he said, "call this number. Day or night." I took the card slowly, feeling the weight of it far heavier than the thin material suggested. "And if I call," I whispered, "will you answer?" His eyes held mine for a long, fragile moment. "I don't ignore people I care about," he said quietly. My breath caught. He cared? Already? Or had I misunderstood? Before I could ask, the driver stepped out to open my door. Adrian didn't move closer. He didn't touch me. He didn't break the tension hanging between us. He simply said, with a voice that stayed with me long after I stepped out of the car, "Take care, Evelyn. I'll see you again." But I didn't know then that the next time we met, the world around us would already be falling apart, and that his secrets would become my burden too. For the next few days, Adrian's presence lived in the empty spaces of my routine. He was in the silence of the early morning before the city fully woke, in the whispers of the wind between the buildings, and the shadows that stretched across the avenue where I worked. I tried to push him out of my mind, to focus on my mother's recovery, on paying bills, on surviving the way I always had. But something had shifted inside me, quietly, irrevocably, and I felt it every time my phone buzzed, even when it wasn't him. I didn't hear from Adrian again right away. And maybe I should have been relieved, but instead I felt a strange emptiness, like a question left unanswered. The business card he'd given me stayed tucked inside my bag, yet I found myself touching it absent-mindedly throughout the day, tracing the embossed numbers as if they might reveal something more. On the fourth morning after our meeting, while I stood beneath the familiar heat of the sun calling out agua, Agua gelada, my mother called me, her voice lighter than it had been in months. Evelyn, the clinic called. They approved the prescription extension. Wait, how? We didn't submit anything yet. That's what I asked, she said. They told me someone already covered the full cost for the next 3 months. My breath hitched. I knew it was him. Of course it was him, but why? Again? Why so quietly? Why without telling me? I hung up, my pulse unsteady, when a car door slammed across the street. I turned automatically, the sound too close, too sharp. For a split second, the silhouette of a black vehicle made my heart jump, but it wasn't Adrian's sedan, just a delivery truck. Tomas walked over, noticing the tension in my posture. You okay? I lied. Just a long week. You don't look okay, he said, nudging my shoulder. What's happening? Limo Man vanished? I forced a small laugh. Maybe he realized he had better things to do. But even as I said it, a dull ache tightened in my chest. I didn't want his money. I didn't want his pity. I didn't want his world. I wanted answers. The sun blazed overhead and I shifted my tray to my other hip. But before I could call out to another line of cars, my phone buzzed with a notification that made my breath freeze. Unknown number. Are you at the avenue today? My heart began pounding. It was him. He had waited days, and now he suddenly reached out? My fingers hovered above the keyboard before I typed, yes. His reply came almost immediately. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't move. A sudden electric shock ran down my spine. I turned to Tomas, trying not to look startled. Can you cover my spot for a few minutes? He narrowed his eyes suspiciously. He's coming, isn't he? I don't know, I whispered. Maybe. Thomas frowned but nodded. Go, I'll handle things. I stepped aside, leaning against the metal railing near the sidewalk, my heart racing with a mixture of excitement and fear. I scanned each car that approached, though I tried not to look like I was waiting for someone. 5 minutes passed. 7. 8. Then a familiar black sedan turned the corner, moving slowly through traffic until it stopped directly in front of me. My breath caught. The driver stepped out first, opening the rear door. And then Adrian emerged, calm, composed, wearing a dark charcoal suit that contrasted beautifully with the afternoon sun. But something was different about him. His expression was more guarded today, his posture tense, as if he carried a storm inside him that he refused to let break the surface. He approached me slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. The noise of the street seemed to dim around us. Evelyn, he said, voice low, steady, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. Hi, I murmured, unable to hide the confusion in my voice. You came back. I told you I would. There was a weight to his words, heavy with something he wasn't saying. Before I could respond, he glanced around the surrounding cars, the pedestrians, the street vendors. Then he stepped a little closer, lowering his voice. I didn't mean to disappear, he said. I had to take care of something urgent. I hesitated. Is everything okay? He gave a short, humorless breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Not yet. I felt that answer like a note struck off. Key familiar, uneasy, soft but trembling with danger. Why did you want to see me? I asked gently. He took a slow breath as if steadying himself. Because something is happening, Evelyn, something I didn't intend. And before it goes any further, I need to know something from you. My stomach tightened. Know what? He held my gaze for a long, suspenseful moment, the city whirling around us as if it belonged to another world entirely. When you look at me, he said quietly, are you afraid? The question cut straight through me, simple, direct, but carrying depths I didn't understand. Was I afraid? Of him? Of his world? Or of what I was starting to feel? I swallowed hard, searching for the truth. I don't know, I whispered honestly. Maybe. A little. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw something raw flicker in his expression, a vulnerability he didn't choose to show. I didn't want that, he said. I don't want to be someone who frightens you. You don't, I said quickly. Not like that. It's just, everything about you is intense, and fast, and confusing. His eyes softened, the storm inside him settling for a fragile moment. I can slow down, he said, if that's what you need. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know if slowing down would make this safer or more dangerous. Before I could find the words, a loud honk shattered the moment. The driver stepped closer, discreetly leaning in. Mr. Thorne, we have to go, now. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, frustration flashing across his features. When he opened them again, he looked torn between staying and leaving, between his world and mine. He reached into his jacket and handed me a small envelope, thin, white, sealed. Read this when you're alone, he said. And don't answer until you're ready. Ready for what? I asked, breath catching. His voice dropped to a whisper, almost painful in its sincerity. For the truth. He stepped back. The driver opened the car door. Adrian hesitated for a heartbeat, as if wanting to say something more, but then he turned and got into the car. The door closed. The sedan pulled away. And I stood frozen in the heat of the afternoon, holding the envelope that suddenly felt heavier than everything I'd carried in years. I didn't know then that what was written inside would break the world as I knew it and pull me into his, whether I was ready or not. When I finally made it home, the envelope felt like it had burned a hole into my palm. I kept glancing at it as I walked up the stairs to our apartment, as if it might suddenly speak on its own. The paper was unmarked, no logo, no initials, nothing to hint at what Adrian had sealed inside. And yet, I knew, deep in my chest, that whatever it contained would change everything again. My mother was asleep on the couch when I entered, her breathing soft, her blankets tucked around her carefully. My brother looked up from the small table where he was doing homework, his expression tightening when he saw my face. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, but my voice felt trapped somewhere behind my ribs. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't believe me, he never did when I said that, but he didn't push. He went back to his work, and I slipped quietly into my room, closing the door behind me. Only then did I let myself sit on the edge of the bed, the envelope resting in my lap. My fingers trembled as I traced the crease. Adrian's voice echoed in my mind. "Read this when you're alone. Don't answer until you're ready. For the truth." I inhaled deeply, steeling myself, and gently tore the seal open. A single sheet of paper slipped out smooth, heavy, expensive. His handwriting was sharp and controlled, each letter intentional. And as I read the first line, my pulse began to thrum violently in my ears. "Evelyn, I should have told you the day we met." My eyes moved faster. That transfer wasn't a spontaneous act. I wasn't at that avenue by accident. The air left my lungs. I reread the sentence, expecting it to change. It didn't. He had been there, intentionally? My stomach twisted as I continued. I had been watching the location for weeks, not because of you, but because I was searching for someone who had information I needed. My hands went cold. Searching for someone? Information? I forced myself to read on. The person I was tracking never showed up, but you did. You looked directly at the window, not knowing who was behind it, and spoke the truth without fear. I hadn't seen honesty like that in years. My heart pounded painfully, 1,000 thoughts colliding all at once. He had been watching. He had been waiting. And I had stepped into whatever he was involved in without knowing, without choosing, without understanding the danger. The next lines made my vision blur. "The people who were following me that day believed you were connected to the person I was tracking. They still believe that. That's why you can't use my name." Fear slashed through me like ice. I'd been careful. I'd told no one except my family and Tomas, but was that enough? I kept reading, each word heavier than the last. "You're not safe if anyone suspects a link between us. I didn't mean to involve you. I tried to stay away these last few days, but the truth is, I've been struggling with more than danger." My breath caught. More than danger? What else? I forced myself to read the final paragraph, my hands trembling so violently the page rustled. "I don't know how to step back anymore. I don't know how to unsee you or pretend that your voice didn't cut through years of silence. I didn't realize I was trapped in, but if I stay close to you, they will notice. And if they notice, they will come for you. I felt the world tilt beneath me. My throat closed, my pulse hammering against my skin. The very last line was a wound I wasn't prepared for. If anything happens to you because of me, I will never forgive myself. The letter slipped from my fingers, drifting onto the blanket beside me. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep from crying out. My breaths came fast, too fast, shaky and uneven. What was this? Who was he really? What danger had I stepped into? And why? Why did the thought of losing him already feel unbearable? A soft knock on my door made me jump. Evelyn? It was my brother. I wiped my eyes quickly. Yeah? Someone's downstairs asking for you. Ice shot through my veins. What? Who? He shrugged. I don't know. A man in a suit. My body froze. Every instinct screamed. Not Adrian. Adrian wouldn't come here unannounced. Not after that letter, not after telling me to stay safe. Did he say his name? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. My brother shook his head. No. But he looks serious. My pulse spiked with panic. I stood up slowly, gripping the edge of the bed, trying to steady my shaking hands. The letter felt like it was screaming inside my mind. If they notice, they will come for you. A man in a suit. Not Adrian, not the driver, not anyone I recognized. Someone else had found me. Before I could take a step, my phone buzzed violently in my hand. Once, twice, 3 times. A message. From Adrian. The first in days. I opened it with trembling hands. Evelyn, don't go downstairs. I'm on my way. My breath shattered into pieces. He knew. He knew someone had come. And suddenly, my world didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like his world, dark, dangerous, complicated, closing in around me. My legs felt unsteady as I stepped back from the door, the phone vibrating once more in my trembling hand. I stared at Adrian's message, the warning written so sharply it felt like his voice was in the room with me. Evelyn, don't go downstairs. I'm on my way. My breath caught. My brother looked at me, confused, concern rising in his eyes. What's going on? Do you know the guy? I swallowed hard. Stay with Mom. Lock the door. Don't let anyone in. I mean it. He didn't argue. He must have seen the fear in my face, the fear I was trying and failing to hide. I shut my bedroom door behind me and backed away, my heart pounding so loud it felt like the walls might echo it. Who was the man downstairs? How did he find me? What did he want? The apartment felt too small, the silence too fragile. I paced, pressing my hand to my forehead, trying to think, trying to breathe. My life had already shifted because of Adrian, but this was a dangerous kind of shift, the kind that filled every corner of the room with shadows I couldn't name. My phone buzzed again. Adrian, stay away from the windows. A chill crashed through me. I stepped back immediately, pressing my back against the cold wall. My mind raced. How did he know? Was he watching the building? Or was someone watching me? Footsteps sounded faintly in the stairwell outside, slow, deliberate, too heavy to be my brother's. I held my breath. Each step creaked with a weight that didn't belong here, in this fragile place full of chipped paint and broken tiles. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. The footsteps stopped right outside our door. My heart felt like it climbed into my throat and got stuck there, throbbing painfully. The metal handle shifted, just a small movement, a test. Someone was checking if it was locked. My brother, bless him, had listened. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare breathe. Then came a soft knock, not loud, not aggressive, but patient. Miss Maren? A voice called, a man's voice, calm and too composed, as if this were nothing more than a polite business visit. I just need a moment of your time. My skin prickled, my fear sharpened. No one here knew my last name. He knocked again, slightly firmer. It's important. You'll want to hear what I have to say. My phone buzzed again, Adrian. Evelyn, don't speak, don't answer. I'm almost there. I pressed myself tighter to the wall, willing my body to feel smaller, quieter, invisible. The man outside exhaled slowly as though losing patience. Ms. Maren, this will be much easier if you open the door. I'm not here to hurt you. Lies. Always lies wrapped in polite smiles. My brother started toward the door from the living room, but I hissed sharply, "Stay back!" He froze. The man outside tried the handle again. The door rattled faintly. Panic tightened around my lungs like a fist. Then a loud sound exploded from downstairs. A car door slammed open. Voices shouted. Rushed footsteps thundered up the stairwell. The man outside shifted suddenly, his composure cracking just enough for me to hear him mutter something under his breath, before the echo of someone else's steps overtook him. Adrian's voice cut through the noise, sharp and authoritative. "Step away from the door." My knees buckled with relief and fear all at once. The air in the hallway shifted, charged and harsh, like two storms about to collide. The man outside responded coolly, "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be, Mr. Thorne." "Move," Adrian growled, "closer now, or I'll make you move." My breath hitched. This wasn't the calm, composed version of him I'd seen before. This was someone dangerous, someone powerful, someone willing to burn the world before letting it touch me. A tense silence stretched, then footsteps shuffled backward. A heavy pause. And the stranger's voice low with warning, "This isn't over." A moment later the footsteps retreated, fast, almost running. Then a knock, gentle this time, on the other side of the door. "Evelyn," Adrian said quietly, breathless in a way I'd never heard before. "It's me. You can open the door." I hesitated only a second. Then I unlocked it with trembling fingers. The moment the door opened, he stepped inside and shut it behind him, his chest rising and falling sharply. His tie was askew. His sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms as if he'd left wherever he'd been in a rush. So when he looked at me, something inside me broke open. His eyes, usually controlled, unreadable, were raw, not with anger, not with fear, with something far more dangerous, relief. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low, urgent. "No," I whispered. "But who was that?" He shook his head, jaw tightening. "Someone who shouldn't know your name, that letter." I whispered. "You said they might come for me, Adrian, what is this? What's happening to me because of you?" He stepped closer, not enough to touch me, but close enough that I felt the heat of him, the force of everything he wasn't saying. "This should never have touched your life," he said. "I tried to stay away. I tried to protect you by keeping distance, but..." He exhaled shakily, eyes flickering to my trembling hands. I can't pretend I don't care what happens to you." My breath faltered. "You shouldn't," I whispered. "Your world, it's dangerous, Adrian. So is mine being in yours," he said softly. "But I'm not leaving." The weight of those words pressed into the room, into my chest. "But why?" I asked, voice breaking. "You barely know me." He shook his head. "I know enough. I know you're honest. I know you're strong. I know you're kinder than the world deserves. And I know that the moment you looked at me in that limousine," his voice cracked just once, "I saw the first piece of my life that didn't feel empty. Something inside me shattered." He closed his eyes just briefly, then stepped back as if afraid he'd crossed a line. "Evelyn, I can keep you safe. But you need to trust me. Can you?" I didn't answer right away. Because trust, for me, had always been fragile. But he had come. He had warned me. He had put himself between me and danger without hesitation. And in that moment, I realized something painful, terrifying, and undeniably true. I already trusted him. More than I should. More than was safe. More than made sense. "Yes," I whispered. "I trust you." His breath released slowly, relief, remorse, longing, all tangled together. "Good," he said softly, "because from this moment on, your life is tied to mine. Not a promise. not a threat. Just the truth. Then he added, almost brokenly, "And I'm terrified I'll destroy you because of it." I didn't know how our story would end, whether love could survive the shadows that followed him, whether hope could survive fear, whether two people from opposite worlds could build anything but heartbreak. But as he stood there in my dim hallway, looking at me like I was the only piece of peace he had left, I felt something impossible bloom inside me. Something real. Something fragile. Something that might save us, or ruin us completely. And for the first time since I met him, I whispered the truth I'd been afraid to say. "Adrian, I don't want you to leave." Outside, the world was dark and dangerous. Inside, his eyes softened like dawn. And though neither of us said it out loud, we both knew. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a love no one would believe, and a story that could cost us everything.